Does anyone need a new word of the day form? In order to tell if you need one, you'll need to pull it out.
Oh, wait, I need one. I
We're gonna do,
looked yesterday.
sorry, we're doing it on the floor, but you're gonna use it here.
Oh, I think I
Sorry,
I need one.
so you're still gonna write down the page on the board.
Do I have my one? I'm not.
I need one.
I would like another one.
You guys are like, new year, new me, throw away everything.
Yes.
I only have one.
Awesome.
I need
Go
to
ahead.
pick out, I still have that blue packing. Have you read Sign of the Sea?
Good. I wasn't sick,
Oh, okay.
but my grandma's at my house. My dad has diabetes, so I want to see what the numbers are.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
What?
Because they're high risk, so I don't want to kill them.
I thought you said you do want to kill them.
I love my parents.
Okay, our word today is aristocracy. So we're still filling this out on the form. Exactly, like Downton Abbey.
Yes.
They have.
Yes. Like how I'm going.
Okay, and I'm just gonna read the definition, so copy what I say. An aristocracy is the highest class in certain societies. The highest class in certain societies, especially those holding, so the highest class in certain societies, especially those holding hereditary titles. Hereditary titles. Okay, so to be clear, aristocracy is not something that you can easily, at least, work your way into. An aristocracy is kind of something that you're either born into or you're not born into. That's what hereditary titles mean. But sometimes people will expand that definition and they will talk about aristocracy just being like very established rich people. And that can be okay too. So what you're gonna do with the Chromebooks, you're going to research. Let me write this down. I think it'll be clearer if I write it down. Whether or not America has an aristocracy. So number one thing you're gonna do
It does.
is you're going to find an article that makes a claim for or against America having an aristocracy.
What about the fact that one of the first governors of New York?
Is that true?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Then number two, so you're gonna put that, you're gonna write the name, write the bibliographical information, so the title and the author in the example box on your word of the day sheet. And then you're gonna skim it. You probably won't have time to read the whole thing, but you're kind of going to look around online. You can find multiple articles if you want to kind of get a sense of whether or not we have an American aristocracy. So under effects, you're going to say, does America have an aristocracy? And if so, how is it different than, one that has hereditary titles? Because we don't here. We don't have king, queen, earl, duke, duchess. We don't have that stuff officially here, right? So if we do have an aristocracy, then what makes it different than these places that do have those kinds of titles, like England, for example? Okay, so you're doing some research on your own about this topic. I'm going to give you 10 minutes, and I want it to be individual research. So I want you to do 10 minutes of silence while everybody is researching this topic. Does anyone have any questions? All right, cool. We will check back in 10 minutes.
Yeah, George Clinton. would be the vice
I could with 80. You know what I mean?
president.
Wow. Okay, but I want it 10 minutes of individual research and then I will give you time to talk about it. Okay. What I want you to do is share what you were reading with the people around you. So tell them what you've discovered about what other people think about this idea of an American aristocracy.
Family business. There's a lot of similarities between like old grandparents and stuff. And like, you know, like my parents not noble families, but it started like it's remaking yourself. Here's the wall. more opportunities and you're like, aren't gonna go work for any other person.
I feel like, it's a lot more.
Okay, so I am now going to play the clip from the movie. So you're gonna watch that. If you're working from home, you're gonna watch that one on your own. I linked to the YouTube video. It says that it has sensitive content. I think it's rated PG though. Maybe it's PG-13, but it's not too sensitive. Don't be afraid. Okay, I'm gonna pause this so I don't get flagged for.
Yeah, it's kind of.
Okay, let's have a very brief discussion about this idea. So these are our three sort of central questions for this unit about the American dream. Is it static? Is it possible? And is it an admirable ideal? So from what you saw up here on this documentary, in what way is this thing about like the American dream or not? Yeah, Maxwell.
Talked about how you said like the orange.
Yeah.
And he sees that thing make money. He built all the way up to like.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I double check because sometimes rich people like to lie about how much money they have starting off, you know. But he came from it seems like pretty middle class beginnings. His parents were grocers, so you know they owned a grocery store as far as I can tell. But to go from that into these days he's worth $500 million. That's quite a growth, you know. So if we're thinking about the American dream as social mobility, they achieve it, you know. What about her though? Is she an example of the American dream, Noah?
Well, as someone who's on a grant, that fee
Yeah.
really reminds me of
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm referring to the one on the infatuated. What? No, the lady that's infatuated with money. Oh, I love him. He's so good. He takes care of me.
Uh-huh.
That's what she feels like. She doesn't, and the way that she like acts around me, like there's not a real connection at all.
Yeah.
But like she for her to say like she was not from a big city, she was the secretary of work with like money. Like she's very money saving.
Yeah, and yet she still got a computer engineering degree, which I think is like fascinating about her because you look at her at first and you're like, oh, I know this woman's whole story, right? But what it actually was she like started working in corporate America and was like, I don't like this very much. What's a different way for me? Which is really interesting. But yeah, it doesn't seem to be like the way was about love. Yeah, Ali Rose.
The way she got into wealth is, I think, very American dream because she decided she didn't like how her life was going, and so she moved to a more urban area, started doing like a very weird profession that most people don't just go into, and then she started gaining popularity, which led her to wealth.
Okay, good. So maybe it's not what we normally think of as like, the epitome of like you work hard, and you build your way up and you build your empire. But in a certain way, she did work hard. She upended her entire life and she worked really hard at catching a rich man, And are there certain kinds of labor that are accepted under the American dream and other kinds of labor that are looked down on under the American dream, Yeah, Abby.
In the beginning, she did what he did because he took his life and he's like, I have this opportunity and like I don't want to like work for anyone else, and so he's like, I'll just like start my own thing. Like, so that's where there's like similar beginnings because she looked at the life and she's like, well, I can be secretary or I can like be the engineer. And so like in her life following that, she's like, oh, I could work for someone with a lot of money, or I could be the person with a lot of money. So like that was her feeling like I don't want to be under anyone, like I'm gonna be on top.
Yeah, and we talk about kind of, in the quote, it talked about what you're innately capable of, and part of what she was innately capable of was being beautiful. So she kind of used those physical qualities that she had to become this great, have this great
Like you know
opportunity.
how to work hard too. 'Cause
Yeah.
To like get a degree, you have to get to work hard. So if you imagine you get to be able to make love.
Right, right, yeah, exactly, yeah, Lord Kate.
So it was like after she started like gaining her popularity,
Yeah,
and then like met the other ones. I think she was like almost was going for it for the money, and then once she was like gaining popularity and got to go to business school, and she was like, oh no, I can do something better. I can do this. I feel like it's kind of the American dream because you're always just kind of striving for what you can have. But she was like, I think that like most people get there.
yeah. Yeah, that quotation that we read, it was like for the life to be better, richer, and fuller. It wasn't for a life to be like rich, best, and full. It's like, oh, it can always be improving. And she takes that maybe to extreme levels where she's just sort of disregarding people's feelings. I don't know if her first husband loved her either, but like sort of just like throwing people aside on your journey to the top in terms of money. Later in the movie, you'll see he does the same thing. He always talks about how when she gets to be 40 or 50, I think he says, he's going to trade her in for a younger model. So it kind of, works on both sides.
They're still married, he's 86.
Yeah, he didn't do it. He didn't do it. It's exciting, but
She's
Wow.
just-
She probably saw that very- yeah. Because she like crazy.
all right. Okay, so
70, I'm like,
is this idea of them being like, if we're saying that, yeah, they're living the American dream, we're kind of saying like, yeah, that's what it means to be American. Is that sitting right with you guys?
No.
Yeah, me neither. We watch it and we're laughing at them, right? And we're kind of disgusted by them. And I think the word that comes up the most is tacky. They are so tacky. They might have a ton of money, but they don't have any class, they don't have any taste level. So what does that tell us about like our reaction to that? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Did anybody watch it and they were like, that's the life I want. I want my stuffed dog on the piano. No. Everybody was like, but yeah, the closet or the ice rink in your house, that doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so funny. To go on with like the class thing, they had all this stuff. They just had this massive home with a ton of trash.
It'll
Yeah.
be
Like
finished this
garbage.
year.
And so they were like, we need a bigger home to hold our garbage.
Yeah.
You have money and you buy stuff, but like if you don't have like with like Beyonce, like she has a presentation.
Uh-huh.
Whereas like her home is like has very strategic, like beautiful things. Her family, like all is very like,
Yes.
Stuff like that. You look at someone like that and you're like, okay, that's a life I can have.
Yeah.
But then you look at them and you're like, they put garbage stuff.
Yeah, it's
Not worth
it's
it. Just like useless.
the term in Marxism and communism, so take it as what, but it's called conspicuous consumption. It's like I just want to consume things so that I can have more and more, and so that I can show off how much I have to somebody else. And it seems like they're doing that without like discerning between what should be considered valuable and what shouldn't be.
Need Maria Kondo for life.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, no.
She's on that organized.
Yeah.
I was watching her Netflix.
And you do you.
But like,
Yeah.
so I feel like when we say like, does it sit right? Be like, well,
Yeah.
Be like,
Okay, good point. It's like if America's the land of opportunities, like they took those opportunities and they did what they wanted to with them, but because there's so much diversity in America, you're not too afraid of other people seeing this movie and saying, that's America. Okay, Ben?
Going off what Nicole said, like the American dream is different for a lot of people. Like most people, I don't think they want that much. Like she's like looking like, behold, the $5 million of
Marble?
marble.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, who needs that?
yeah, who needs that? So the American dream is like, yeah, individualistic. Like everyone has like lower standard than the biggest house.
Yeah, okay, good, good. Maxwell?
And I think the main part about the American dream is that it's you're living your life to the fullest, and so like, that's how they want to live their lives.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily been like bad light. But I'd say that's been more of a bad light on them.
Yeah. Okay, so it's like, why are you fulfilled by this
Yeah.
idea? But you don't think that would come from the idea of the American dream?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also think like the reason that they kind of like that is because they're kind of just like ordinary people who got lots of money, and he's not making money. It's like his business.
Mhm.
Or like with other like celebrities and stuff, their appearance is like what makes them. So, like,
Oh, so they have to cultivate it a little
Yeah.
bit better. Ah, interesting. Interesting. I really like this idea though that you said they're just regular people who have gotten a lot of money. That, I mean, when we started here, that really is what the American dream is in terms of wealth. It's like, even if you're born into poverty, you should be able to work your way out of that because of all these opportunities that America essentially provides for you, right? And yet, when we watch them do that up here, we are a little bit put off by it. Like even if you're not saying that reflects America, you are kind of saying like that reflects badly on them. Like, why are they so like unhappy with just getting a normal amount of money and sort of being, I don't know, a little bit more careful with it, you know? But I think part of this goes to what I think Noah said it earlier, like this difference between old money and new money. And I wanna talk about that a little bit. When we say old money versus new money, what does that mean? Cameron.
I think like new money, I like picture like the Kardashians and stuff. Like all these like modern stuff.
Yeah.
They like really fancy and stuff. Like, old money comes from like the generation.
Yeah, okay, good. And which do you think we're more impressed by in this country?
New money.
Well,
New,
new money because of
old.
social media. I think new money.
Interesting.
Those people are making their money off of media, and then old money is more like reserved.
Interesting,
way.
because of how public making money is now, new money seems like it's maybe like a little bit attainable for us, so we might be impressed by these people too, because they're so visible.
Like is old money like a business? Like
Not
like the
necessarily.
Walmart
Like
family?
generational.
Yes, it's generational. So the Walmart family, yes, but like my dad built a business, you know, and we wouldn't necessarily say, oh, just because he's in business, he's old money, because his parents were lower middle class. So it's kind of it's about like money being passed down. So like for us, it's like the Johnson and Johnson family, the Clintons, the I don't know who else, the Koch brothers, like people who are passing down wealth family to family. The Waltons are the Walmart people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, what were you gonna say, Elle?
I was gonna say that in thinking like the American Dream, I don't like this family. I think we know a little bit more about like watching it. But if you were to just say like, okay, if you were to show someone not from the US, like, yeah, this is what the dream is, it comes off like I don't know, like really selfish because just like from looking at it, the relationship doesn't seem like a natural like romance. You know, they love and they really like, love each other. I love when they're like, cause like yeah, providing for your family and like living a life with just enough that you can like spend things with your family but also take care of them. Like in this, it seems like they're both using each other for something else. 'Cause
Yeah.
even the way like he said like, oh, I fell in love with her right next to her, like that was like this. And she's like, oh yeah, I quit everything I had to marry this rich guy.
Right, right. I love when he says, I don't know what she sees in me. I think he knows exactly
Yeah.
what she sees in him. Yeah.
She even was like, oh yeah, like, it took me a while to fall in love with him.
Yeah.
So it doesn't. It looks like that's what these people's values are.
Okay, good. So it seems like the values then on just growth through money seem very superficial. And so we look at them when we think this is like an example of like how you could be the most superficial sort of unfulfilled version of yourself. And yet, when we talk about the American dream as an ideal, we are thinking about somebody growing from nothing yet. Yeah. So it's really interesting to me that when we think about what constitutes class and taste and beauty and all of that, often that's more associated with old money than new money. But new money is kind of the version of the American dream, and old money is antithetical to the American dream. In America, you're not supposed to just like have everything handed to you like an aristocracy. Right? So that being said, let's read Gatsby. Oh, yeah, one more.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, it was really interesting also seeing like the stark contrast between like their high society family versus like the nanny. Like
Yes,
the
yeah.
Filipino
I meant to bring
nanny
that up.
who like just so like so different and like it kind of expressed more of like her selfishness.
Yes, and you see her more in the movie and how many hours she works. And then you see the mom in the movie just like throwing garbage around, just like super like filthy and lazy and relaxed all the time. And the nanny just coming up behind her and like picking it all up. Which is like a huge stark contrast between can you actually, you know, work your way up in the way these two represent it. Okay, open up Gatsby. Oh, we don't need your Chromebooks anymore. I'm sorry, I should have told you that earlier.
It was interesting how the nanny was like, he's in charge of his own home, he knows what's going on here.
And he's like, I don't know, whatever children do.
I know, whatever the kids do.
Yeah.
He was being so funny. People are
He
better
has
off.
so much
since they
power,
don't.
he can completely destroy her if he doesn't say the right stuff.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. This book.
My favorite is, since you know me, like you're just better off.
Yeah, I know, that's my favorite part.
David?
Okay. Let me get your attention again. So this book was written in 1925. In 1925, we are at the height of the roaring 20s. People are feeling prosperous. There's a huge movement from rural communities into cities because people can now get jobs in cities and they can afford to live in cities. There is the automobile is starting to boom, technology is starting to boom. People are starting to like, think about air travel too. So you've got like Charles Lindbergh that's like flying across America. You've got like this sort of, what I'm trying to say is like this sort of like frenzied attitude to life. Like life is just really, really exciting. Social norms are experiencing upheaval. Technology is experiencing upheaval. Your wealth is growing, etc. Yeah, Abby?
So is this like before, during, or after the Great Depression?
So this is before the Great Depression, 4 years before the Great Depression. And part of what causes the Great Depression is like how much people are spending and how free they are with their money and how many sort of bets they're willing to take on Wall Street. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that. But so he's writing at the height of this like idea of wealth and really like when the American dream might have been seemingly the most reachable for people, especially if they were living in urban settings. Fitzgerald, when he wrote this, it was not immediately popular. He wrote a book called This Side of Paradise First that everyone was like, oh, this guy's a genius, that he's going to be the best writer ever. And then this was his second book and they were sort of like, it's all right. They kind of dismissed it a little bit. I think it sold 20,000 copies, which is like not a great run, and kind of went away. But during World War II, because of how thin it is, they were able to print these pretty cheaply. And this was one of the books that they sent to people who were fighting in World War II, like for entertainment. It was like, here's a copy of Great Gatsby and some Superman comics, you know? And so it became really popular in part because all these soldiers in World War II were reading this book and they sort of brought home their love for this book. And it really blew up from there. By that time, Fitzgerald had died of basically being an alcoholic. It was liver failure, I want to say, or heart attack. Anyway, it was because he drank too much.
Sounds about right.
Yes. All right. So we're gonna start just reading this together, and then for your homework for not Friday but Tuesday, all you gotta do is finish the first chapter. We're gonna go a little bit slow through the beginning of this, but I will start reading. Okay. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. But he didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way. And I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequence, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that has opened up many curious natures to me and also makes me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quick to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person. And so it came about that in college, I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, or at least the terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppressions. Reserving judgments is a matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. Okay, let's pause there. This character, his name is Nick. He'll introduce himself in a bit. He reveals a lot about himself and his personality in these first couple of paragraphs. What would you say are some personality characteristics of our narrator? I love him. I love Toby.
He does sound like Tobey Maguire.
That's because in the movie version,
That's-
Tobey Maguire plays
really?
Nick. Yeah. But tell me, I mean, actually, the comparison is not that off if you know Tobey Maguire's history, but I don't expect your age to really know much about Tobey Maguire. Is that fair to say?
He dated his co-star.
Okay, let's move on then. Tobey Maguire was a child star, little playboy kid. Yeah, he was best friends with Leonardo DiCaprio. They went around terrorizing LA and never got into any trouble for it. All right, but really, tell me, based on the text that we just read, what are some things that we know about this character now? Yeah, Ali Rose.
He talks about how his dad was telling him to like be more humble and like be kinder in attitudes towards other people. But then he continues on with like complete opposite of what his dad says. And he's like, he doesn't say anyone in particular, but he sounds like he's judging other people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's like, the dad said, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember how many advantages you've had in life, right? And yet throughout the next paragraph, he's just like, everyone who tells me stuff is boring and wild, and I hate listening to them. But because of this advice, I've had to. Yeah, Lexi.
Kind of piggybacking off of that. It says at the very beginning it was while he was younger.
Mhm.
He was told that, and I'm just assuming that's been told to him a lot throughout his life, and he's probably really frustrated with it. And frustrated of always hearing you're blessed, you're fortunate, and the thing with that is, even though he may have a very good life, that doesn't mean he's necessarily happy. So he could be like, okay, yeah, I get it. I have a great life. I get it. Stop telling me. I'm annoyed. I'm tired of hearing it.
Yeah.
It's starting to really annoy me because and so there's stuff like that. And it kind of leads me to think that I wonder if he would actually be kind of this snobbish. That's how he describes it. If he would be this like kind of snobbish and arrogant if he wasn't told that, because so many times as a kid, because you're shaped as a kid.
Yeah.
That's how you kind of like turn out as an adult. And so I wonder if all of that hearing like, oh, you're so blessed, you need to be kind to other people. He's just finally like, okay, you know what? I'm not a selfish person. Why do you have the need to keep telling me this? You know, if you're gonna just assume that I'm going to look down on people because they're not as good as me, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah, that is so astute. I think what you're picking up too is not just in my younger years, but in my vulnerable years. Him using that word, it's almost like he's accusing his dad of brainwashing him a little bit in those beginning years. And you're absolutely right. He says, as my father snobbishly suggested, and I snobbishly repeat, a sense of the fundamental decencies is parceled out unequally at birth. He's like, part of what makes me a snob is also thinking that I'm advantaged and therefore better, happier than all these other people. And it's frustrating to him. Absolutely. Okay, let's keep going. So he says, and after boasting this way of my tolerance, I come to the admission that it has a limit. Conduct may be founded on the hard rock or the wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of the creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end. It is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and short-winded elations of men. Okay, just so you know, the language of this book it's not always this flowery. This book is mostly very plot driven. But at the very beginning here, we get Nick, this narrator, really contemplating the things that happen to him. And he's like, I want no more to do with those things. Tell me how he feels about this guy Gatsby that he's referring to.
It's like a breath of fresh air. It's different.
Yes. And so there's something like romantic about him, romantic in the way of a romantic hero, like different, an outsider. Yes, exactly. What else does he think about Gatsby, Abby?
He's just like intrigued by him. He like doesn't really know like how he got to where he got to, but he likes the idea of where he's at.
Yes. Yeah. Or where he
He's
was.
kind of scared of how he got there. Or
Yep. Yeah, Gatsby turned out at the end, but it's what preyed on Gatsby that's the problem. So he's a little bit nervous about this, motivation that Gatsby has, maybe. Tell me about this line where he says, if personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures. What does that mean? How can personality be an unbroken series of successful gestures? Yeah, Cameron.
I think when like you kind of shape how you are as a person.
Yeah.
So like when something does well for you in your past, you kind of like became like do things like that.
Okay, excellent. So this is kind of the opposite of how we usually think of personality. Often we think you're born with a certain personality and you kind of develop it through your experiences, but it's very internal. But what Cameron's saying is personality can be external. Personality can be based on actions. You do, therefore you are, instead of I am, therefore I do. Yeah.
It reminds me of like Bigot from Bigot.
Yes.
Because it's like someone's like, oh, their personality isn't actually driven this way, but because it's worked out for them so long, then it's starting to like they're kind of creating their own personality.
Yes. And usually when you guys talk about like people faking their personalities, isn't that a negative thing? Like, oh, this person is so fake. Like they pretend to be nice when inside they aren't actually nice. But Nick has like a lot of admiration for this. How do we see that? Yeah, Maxwell.
Well, one thing that makes me think of is Mean Girls, where I haven't seen it in a while, but the main girl like roots everyone.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be fake at the beginning, but then she actually like starts her own.
But then it actually becomes fake. I think that we are like really comfortable thinking of it in that direction, like, oh, you behave badly, and then that starts to sort of like corrupt you. But couldn't it also be the other way? Even though you're a terrible person inside, you behave well, and that starts to lift you up. And I think here he talks about these ideas that Gatsby is gestures, but he says they're unbroken, they're successful, which means it's consistent. So even if this isn't actually who Gatsby is on the inside, it's a very good performance. And he says that makes Gatsby gorgeous. And I love that word gorgeous that he uses there. Like he loves this man. We can talk about all the different ways that might actually, different kinds of love that he has, but he is so impressed by this man. And something happened that made him want to escape from that man. And so that's kind of where we start here with that. Okay, let's keep reading. My family had been prominent, well-to-do people in this Middle Western city for 3 generations. The Carraways are something of a clan, and we had a tradition that we're descended from the Dukes of Bucolic, but the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started a wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him, with special reference to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in that delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War. So he's a veteran for World War I, he's talking about. I enjoyed the counter raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like the ragged edge of the universe. So I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it could support one more single man. All my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, why, yes, with very grave, hesitant faces. Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays, I came east, permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. The practical thing was to find rooms in the city, but it was a warm season, and I had just left a country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. He found the house, a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow at $80 a month, but at the last minute, the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out to the country alone. I had a dog, at least I had him for a few days until he ran away.
Oh,
I know. And an old Dodge and a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove. I love that. He assumes it's Finnish wisdom. He doesn't speak Finnish. She could be cursing him out. It was lonely for a day or so until one morning some man, more recently arrived than I, stopped me on the road. How do you get to West Egg Village? He asked helplessly. I told him, and as I walked on, I was lonely no longer. I was a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. He had casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. It's kind of like when you move to New York for the first time and you've been there 3 months and you get asked directions by a tourist, and suddenly you are a New Yorker now, you know.
You don't want to be a New Yorker.
So
I
with,
work with a New Yorker.
so with the sunshine and the great burst of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. There was so much to read for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young, breath-giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas and Morgan and Maecenas knew. And I had the high intention of reading many other books besides. I was rather literary in college. One year, I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials for the Yale News. And now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again that most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded man. This isn't just an epigram. Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house in one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on that slender, riotous island which extends itself due east of New York, and where there are, among other natural curiosities, 2 unusual formations of land. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only by a courtesy bay, just out into the most domesticated body of saltwater in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard of Long Island Sound. They are not perfect ovals, like the egg in the Columbus story. They are both crushed flat at the contact end, but their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular except shape and size. I wanted to get to this next part, but we've got to stop here. He's going to describe the differences between these 2 places, and he's going to describe which one he chooses and why he chooses that. All right, so your homework is to finish chapter 1, and you don't have to annotate, but to show me that you're doing the reading for Gatsby, I have little responses. So you respond to it, it will be a 1-paragraph response on Canvas.
So we don't have to have.
No, you don't have to annotate. You certainly can, though, if you find it useful.